As Prime Minister, Keir Starmer hasn't had a great time. His net personal approval has sunk all the way down to -42, far behind Kemi Badenoch. 66% of those polled think that the current government is just more of the same, and 74% of people think that things in the UK are getting worse. Despite their increasing unpopularity, Labour seem to be clinging on in the polls because there just isn't a party strong or popular enough to challenge them. For Starmer, this seems to be something of a luxury. When the Conservatives were in power, they constantly had to contest with a party to their right, complaining that they weren't right-wing enough. Under David Cameron, it was UKIP. Under Theresa May and Boris Johnson, it was the Brexit Party. And under Truss and Sunak, it was Reform UK. This raises the question then, why hasn't a party to Starmer's left, such as the Greens, begun to claim disaffected Labour voters for themselves? Why, despite Starmer's rightwards turn, hasn't a party to his left galvanised support in the same way that Reform UK has? Let's take a look. Never miss an episode and always feel in the loop by subscribing and ringing the bell. We're going to split this video into two parts. In the first, we're going to have a look at whether Starmer has dragged the Labour Party to the right and whether there's a significant number of Labour supporters that could be tempted to vote Green. In the second, we're going to have a look at the Green Party, specifically why they haven't managed to reach the heights of, say, Reform UK. Now, when Starmer actually first ran for the leadership of the Labour Party, he seemed like he might actually be something of a left-wing figure. He advocated for scrapping tuition fees, promised he'd scrap the two-child benefit cap, promised to increase income tax for the top 5% of earners, and promised to defend free movement as we leave the EU. However, since he's become leader, he's backtracked on his tuition fee promise, defended the two-child benefit cap, didn't raise income tax at all for higher earners in the first budget last year, and committed to not rejoining free movement in the Labour manifesto last year, as one of his Brexit red lines. And in a particularly controversial move, when he became leader, Starmer promised that he'd invest £28 billion on a green investment plan, something he went on to ditch. Perhaps it's unsurprising then that in the run-up to the general election, Starmer himself was accused of attempting to purge the left of his party. The party blocked Jeremy Corbyn, Diane Abbott, Faiza Shaheen and Lloyd Russell Moyle, all on the left of the party, from standing for the party, for a variety of reasons. In fact, there's even some hard research to back this rightward shift up. Chris Hanratty, a professor of politics at Royal Holloway, UOL, asked 1,006 councillors to rank their MPs and the Prime Minister on a left-right scale, where 0 is the most left-wing and 100 is the most right-wing. Starmer's rating is 48, which seems pretty central, but actually puts him to the right of 401 of his Labour colleagues. Now, while his huge electoral victory certainly demonstrates that there is a proportion of his party, and indeed the country, that backs his politics, there's also certainly some evidence since that there's a group that might have previously supported Labour but don't like his rightward shift. Polling from YouGov shows that, among Labour supporters, 50% think that the government are not doing enough to reduce carbon emissions. Around 70% of Labour supporters think that the UK should rejoin the EU, single market and customs union. 43% of Labour supporters think the government is handling welfare benefits badly, and more Labour voters think benefits are too low than too high. 72% think taxes on the rich aren't high enough, and 37% think that tuition fees are unfair. Essentially, there's a proportion of Labour supporters that align with Starmer's left-wing policies, the ones that he ditched in his right-wing turn. As it turns out, these are broadly policies that the Green Party advocates for. So why aren't they taking these voters and polling higher? Well, the first thing to note is that on the whole, voters have a relatively good opinion of the Green Party. Compared to the other four main political parties, the Greens are seen as the most likeable, the party with the clearest sense of purpose, and the party that cares most about them. This, though, isn't enough for people to actually support them. The issue is that they're also the party that most people think has the most unworkable policies, and are ranked as the least fit to govern. To an extent, this is what we'd expect. The Greens know that they're unlikely to form a majority government, and tend to be more interested in setting the agenda and pushing Labour to the left. However, as we mentioned in the intro, times seem to be changing in British politics. Reform UK is a brand new party that's less integrated into the political system. They're able to poll just as highly as the Tories and Labour, whilst having a single MP more than the Greens. This is despite them being the party the public most think should not be near power. So why is this? Well, for starters, they just don't have a popular, well-known leader. They, in fact, have two lesser-known co-leaders. This makes it difficult for the public to identify them, and even harder for them to hit headlines. These co-leaders too are, to put it bluntly, too nice. Reform have been clear that they're trying to take votes from the Tories. The Greens just don't seem to have this ambition with Labour. A prime example of this is Labour voting down a law proposed by Liberal Democrat MP Ros Savage to bind the UK to its climate change targets. While Green co-leader Carla Denyer denounced this, they didn't make a big fuss. It wasn't mentioned on their social media platforms at all. This would have been a perfect time to stick the boot into the government and make a big fuss, as Farage regularly does with Labour and the Tories. It's not so much that the Greens don't denounce Labour, it's just that they don't put as much behind it as, say, Reform do. This leads us nicely onto our last point, the Greens' social media strategy more generally. It just isn't on a par with other political parties, and at least their TikTok seem to be an eclectic collection of badly edited memes and clips of parliamentary appearances. Consequently, they have only 1/6 the number of followers as Reform UK on TikTok. Now, you could argue that there just aren't figures on the left that pull people in like Farage does, but that's plainly not true. Zara Sultana has more followers than both the Greens and Reform UK combined. Presumably, knowing that there's more they could be doing, there's reportedly growing frustration within the party at the social media strategy. All in all then, it does seem like the Greens are in a strong position, and they just aren't yet grasping the opportunity. That's not the end of this story though, with 2025 already shaping up to be a rather busy year for news. In fact, there's so much going on that we don't have time to cover it all. Just in America, there's everything from the question of whether Trump's becoming an imperial president, to America's wild history of territorial expansion, to questioning if the US is actually an oligarchy. All of these things could lead you to say WTF USA, which is appropriately also the name of the series I'm literally telling you about right now. WTF USA takes a tongue-in-cheek look at the weirder side of US politics, unpacking what Trump's really up to and why Trump's kind of weird decisions could end up being incredibly impactful. WTF USA is released every other Friday only on Nebula, the streaming service we co-own with a bunch of your favourite creators. Those creators also make a ton of other exclusive Nebula content like Real Life Law's series War Room. That's the show where every month the Real Life Law team breaks down all of the ongoing wars and conflicts around the world to keep you up to date and informed on what's happening and why, which in an incredibly complex world could prove to be a very helpful summary. It's not just original content either. You can also watch every normal TLDR video on Nebula ad-free, and in some instances before they land on YouTube. If you're not a member already, click our link in the description to get 40% off, which brings the price down to just $36 a year or $3 a month. That's a real steal considering all of the original content on the platform, and the fact that signing up using our link directly funds the channel and allows us to make more content going forward. So thanks for your support, and please do join us over on Nebula.